Shir and Sichos HaRan. We are on Seif Kuf Tzadik Gimel, paragraph 193. Rabbi Arizal said in reference to the topic of money, topic of gaining money and spending money, using it. Rabbi Arizal said that the necessary powers or actions that pertain to money the same as those that pertain to food. In food, there are different forces, different types of functions that the body accomplishes. The same thing a person must apply to money. For example, when a person eats, there is the power or function of retention, retaining the food, knowing how to receive it, how to limit the amount that the intake of a person, or he could harm himself, how to see that the food remains within. He shouldn't return it, regurgitate it. Retaining that food is one function. The same thing applies to money. A person has to know how to retain the money he's got, not to earn it and then squander it and lose it immediately. Secondly, there is the power of digestion, function of the digestive tract, where the food is digested and then it is distributed through the bloodstream to the various parts of the body. And of course, selectively, a certain part of that food goes to the heart, the main arteries, some go to different organs of the body. And this is one of the marvels of creation. The fact that Hashem gave to the body power of digesting, converting the food to different forms, and then distribute it to all the parts of the body that need this nourishment. The same thing too, if a person earns money, he must know how to spend this money wisely and properly, how to allocate the necessary sum for living expenses, naturally the most vital item, to tzedakah, to give the meiser, distribute the money where it will do the greatest benefit, to spend money for his children's sake, educate them properly, send them to yeshiva, mitzvah Arizal, expenses for Talmud Torah, other forms of expenditures, whether they are for spiritual or material purposes. And then too, there is eating, there is the power of relieving oneself or getting rid of the waste matter. Here too, there is certain parts of the money that are considered waste, where a person has to give money to a non-Jew who works for him. A person must spend money on things that are tamei, on things that are waste matter. Benedel said the Baal Shem Tov had a very special power, that where his money automatically was distributed properly. Baal Shem HaKodesh would accept money from various people as tzedakah. Of course, it is known that giving money to the tzaddik is the greatest sichos possible in the midst of tzedakah itself. Now, there were tzaddikim who gave money to Baal Shem HaKodesh. There were ordinary people, simple people. There were also the shoim, very evil people. Baal Shem HaKodesh took this money, distributed, spent it for different purposes of kedusha. It was spent for the sake of his teaching Torah. It was spent for the sake of supporting the valuable institutions that existed then, the yeshivas. It was spent on the poor people who needed food for Shabbos Kodesh, very sacred purposes. And also there was money that was spent for the horses, to feed the horses of the Baal Shem HaKodesh's coach, to pay for the coachmen, the workers who were goyim. The money the Baal Shem HaKodesh received automatically that money that came from good people was spent for good causes. The money that came from Rishoyim, though it was mixed together, merged with all the other monies, that money itself still went to the waste matter causes. Whereas an ordinary person who doesn't have this blessing, who's not endowed with this type of privilege, should see to it, spending his money, he should do so properly, wisely, see that the money is distributed in a wise manner, and that he should give priorities to that which deserves priority. Especially as the Gemara says that a person should know where to invest. Invest your money where you receive the greatest dividends. For example, in giving tzedakah, a person should be aware of the fact that he is not really spending money. He must reach that level of faith where he believes implicitly that when he gives money to tzedakah, especially when he gives meiser, he takes a full 10% of his earnings, his salary, or his wages, or his profits in his business venture. A full 10% is given away. He has no physical benefit from this money at all. He does not see it again, or so it seems, and yet he must have complete faith that that money was not spent, it did not leave his possession. The money was invested. There is a record kept, a heavenly record kept of every penny of that money that is spent, invested, and there is a profit, a dividend paid for that investment. A dividend pays very highly. The interest rate is a very high one, paid from heaven. The interest rate is something that a person receives during his lifetime. He might invest only $1 or a few pennies for tzedakah giving to a poor man. The dividends could run to thousands of dollars for that one single dollar. In addition, though, the principal is not touched. He gave his $1 or $100 for meiser. The $100, that principal remains intact. It stays in the bank of heaven, and it is collected only after a person passes away. Though he received the dividends that amount to many-fold, many times this amount during his lifetime, yet the principal remains intact. When he comes to heaven, he then collects, he then withdraws the entire principal. Not in an earthly form of money, but in a spiritual form. This is converted in heaven to something very spiritual. As Arizal says, money is the same origin as the nefesh, as the soul. So that in heaven it becomes a soul item, a soulful item, a spiritual item, and this remains with him everlastingly in Gan Eden. But this requires a pure, simple faith. The emunah must be so perfect, so implicit, that he should not feel the slightest pang of remorse, regret, or pain when he gives the meiser. On the contrary, he should feel confident that this is money that's being invested and never lost. That is distributing money wisely and properly, and for this, of course, he receives his due reward. Arizal said, too, that the main evil desire that pertains to money, of course, money itself, it is said, is the root of all evil. Actually, that's not exactly true. It's the lack of money which is the root of all evil. A person who feels he lacks money will go to the extent of stealing, chas v'sholem, stealing, or neglecting to give money for tzedakah because he feels he needs that 10% for himself. He can't afford it at the present time. Someday perhaps he'll pay it. And of course, in most cases, that someday never comes. So what is the reason why a person has this evil taiva? What causes this taiva, this evil desire, specifically with money? It's one of the three major evil desires that exist. The answer is because he does not have the keli, does not have the utensil means of receiving this money, which itself is something sacred, and manipulating it or using it in its various forms, the forms of retention, digestion, distribution, and so on. Person, of course, if he does not have this, at least the key is to be mispalel. Daven to Hashem for help. His this is the cure-all, and it surely will help for this too. A person feels that he has not done with his money as he should have done throughout his life, throughout a period of time in his lifetime, should daven to Hashem in his hisbodedus and with intensity, with deep kavanah, that Hashem should help him at least from now on to improve, to correct the past, to begin to live properly by spending the money in a manner that it is in accordance with the dictates of the Torah. Arizal said that, he once said that every person, no matter how wealthy, no matter how well off he is, still has periods of yisurim, of suffering, whether it is physical suffering, whether it is mental anguish, whether it is financial problems, or what's even worse is a lack of nachas. Children, chas v'sholom, he does not find that his children are acting the way he would like them to, they're not going a righteous path. Each person has different types of yisurim. There are some who suffer because of government worries, too much taxes. Others who suffer because they have an innate fear of the unknown. They are the worrying type. All these types of yisurim, Arizal says, after all this, even where it is true, people do have reason to consider themselves not too well off. They are either sick, suffering physically, chas v'sholom, or they have had financial setbacks, they are impoverished, they find it difficult to make ends meet, to provide the family with necessities that do them. In all these cases, a person should realize that still Hashem is still being very good to us, extremely good. It's just that we don't know how to minimize the feeling of suffering. We've got to realize that we have to maximize, increase our feelings about how good Hashem is to us, and to disregard, to an extent, the degree of suffering. Because if a person is really, if he is truly attached to Hashem, his mind, his action, then all the yisurim, no matter what type of suffering there is, even if it is physical torture, it cannot compare to a thought, a person's mental being, when it is elevated to a point where it's literally attached to thoughts of serving Hashem. And therefore it is through a person's mind, willpower, that he can actually be mevatel, he can make void all the yisurim. This is something that is recognized throughout the world, where people say that suffering is only mental. We find those who have the power of concentration who can take physical torture without feeling anything because they concentrate on something else strongly enough. So imagine that if a person concentrates on his love for Hashem, it is possible for a person to stand before an oppressor. Cases where Jews were being put to death on Kiddush Hashem for the sake of their religion. They were put into the fire, actual fire, gas chambers or cauldrons, being burnt to death, scalded to death, chas v'sholom, tortured to death. They took it smilingly, without crying out at all. Rabbi Akiva, when he was being put to death, smiled. He was happy. Do these people feel pain? The answer is, if their ahavas Hashem is so great, they are so thrilled at the thought of being able to die al Kiddush Hashem, they feel no physical pain. There is actually no suffering on their part. And that's because their emunah is that perfect. It's reached a degree of perfection where the yisurim becomes completely nullified. So too, Rabbi Nachman says that it's possible in a simpler form. A person finds that he is chas v'sholom ill. His reaction should be, why am I ill? Who has caused my illness? This was an act of Hashem. this is what Hashem wants right now. In that case, then, my body is fulfilling the will of Hashem by being sick. Therefore, I am now attached to Hashem. And I should enjoy this. I should be happy about this. To go much further, the Arizal says, the greatest tragedy possible is when a parent loses a child, chas v'sholom. It's much greater than when children lose their parents. Even at the time of a tragedy like that, if Hashem takes a child, chas v'sholom, the person should say, who is taking this child? Hashem. That is the will of Hashem. That means that right now, this action of losing the child means that something is being done to me which brings me close to the will of Hashem. Therefore, I should be satisfied with that thought. Now, to those who don't feel this, those who cannot grasp this thought, then it seems awesome. It seems impossible. It seems a very strange type of statement. However, those who are accustomed to learning about the degree of great tzaddikim, their attachment in serving Hashem, they can very well understand this and hope to be able to achieve this. Because in Elam Haba, when there is no longer a goof, a body, any of these items, then a person is really close to Hashem. Everything has been removed. So that now when a person is sick, that means he is closer to Elam Haba than when he is well. When a person has suffering, he is closer to Hashem than when he is enjoying the physical part of life, because when the body suffers, the neshama thrives, the same as on a fast day. We know that when a person fasts, when the guf is nichna, the body is subdued, and the neshama, the soul, is elevated. So at a time like that, a person is closer to Elam Haba than normally, and therefore, hence, he is closer to Hashem, which should bring to him a degree of deep satisfaction and joy. Of course, this takes a lot of effort, a lot of training to be zeichet to a madrega of this kind. At least we know what to look forward to. Also, we know about having some thought of consolation. If ever a person does have a little bit yisurim, at least, not to take it to heart too much, and to understand the proper attitude. Be zeichet to an attitude where a person accepts everything happily because this is what Hashem wants. Hashem's will is being fulfilled. I'm taking part in this. I'm closer to Hashem now. I accept it without question. That is the amunah a person should strive for. Rosenfeld tells about a statement that Arizal once made to his Talmidim, where the Rosenfeld was present. Arizal said, that which I am doing with you, my students, my Talmidim, and for you, that is something which you really must do yourself. This meant, what am I doing for you? I'm being mekadev you. I'm taking you who are so remote, so far from Avedis Hashem, serving Hashem, I'm bringing you to Teshuva, to return to Hashem, to make you more religious, to ma'ala you to a higher madreget, elevate you. This is one of the great acts. It's an act of tchiyas hamesim. A person's neshama is dead, or partially dead. Tzadik emes was mekadev that person, brings him close to Hashem, revives the neshama. He gives back life to it. So R Nosson was very surprised. He writes that he marveled at this statement. Arizal said, this that I'm doing for you, you are supposed to be doing yourself because this is too small for me. It's too small a type of service. I should not be bothered with this item. Rosenfeld finally asked, how is that possible? Isn't bringing a Jew close to Hashem, to speak to a Jew who's far, to influence him, to inspire him, to do tshuva and come close to Hashem, isn't that the greatest possible mitzvah? Isn't that the highest avodah possible? Why is that called small and we should do it ourselves? Surely we need the tzadik emes to help us, to bring us close. Arizal explained, and he said that's true. It's true that that is an extraordinary degree of mitzvah. Zohar Kodesh says, Zakor Ashrei Ashrei, to that person who's zecher to spend his time to succeed in bringing a Rosha closer to Hashem to do tshuva. Ashrei, to a person who's zecher to that. However, a Rosha needs compassion, he needs pity, he needs help, but there are ones who need help even more so than the Rishonim, even more so than those who are very far from Hashem. And those are ones who are not bodies, the unborn neshamas, the souls that have not been born yet, souls that are without a garment, without a cloak, they are unclothed, and they are in a plain location, area, where it's impossible for them to enter into a body. For some reason, they're anamadrega, where they are not fit to enter into a body, to be born, to come to this world. And therefore, it is a much greater pity on them than those who have come to this world, those who have lived, even though they have sinned. Because even if they committed sins, even the Shoyim, still, during their lifetime, the Gemara says even the Shoyim do perform mitzvahs. They have done certain mitzvahs to a degree, or they have children who will be doing mitzvahs later on. There are future generations, and there is some hope for them, either for themselves, the mitzvahs they have done that will deserve credit, deserve reward, more so than one who has no mitzvahs at all. Or at least their children will also credit them. The actions of children are credited to the parents. However, for these neshamas, these souls who have not been born yet, and for whom it's impossible for them to be born, then they cannot rise upwards, they cannot advance themselves at all, and on them it is the greatest pity of all possible. That Rabbi Arizal said is the work I should be using. I should strive for that type of avodah. I should occupy myself, dedicate myself to that task of helping those neshamas that are completely helpless. Bringing others close to Hashem, you can do also, he said to the students, because you cannot hope to achieve the reaching out and drawing of those neshamas that are helpless. That's my task. But you could bring others close to Hashem, and therefore, for me, that is small. Despite that, of course, it's understood. Rabbi Arizal still spent his lifetime, devoted all his efforts for the sake of his Talmidim, though he also did occupy himself with those helpless souls. Rabbi Arizal said, as far as speaking about the souls, they're also Gilgulim, reincarnations that are unknown to the Kabbalah. Those who wrote the Sifrei Kabbalah who deal with the topic of Gilgulim. They reveal the fact that certain great names in the Torah are Gilgulim of former generations. They reveal the lineage of one Gilgul after the other. But even the greatest, the Kabbalah, greatest Sifrei Kabbalah, are unaware about certain Gilgulim which Rabbi Arizal knew of. They were still kept a secret. Others that had not been revealed to the world. And two, the details about Gilgulim, the fact that a Gilgul means a person is reborn. He had lived previously, he is reborn again, he is given the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvahs which he failed to do during his previous lifetime, or to correct some of the sins he committed then. At the same time, just as a child is born with the inherited traits of parents, children resemble parents in many instances, so too in this case is a Gilgul actually a derivation of a person who lived previously. And therefore he inherits those traits of character that he possessed during his former life. This too he's born with these traits because he is part of that same guf, neshama that lived before. Inheriting these traits will bring about certain items, will cause certain items that the person cannot really comprehend. For example, Rabbi Nachman says we'll find that a person has a desire to go traveling. He'd like to travel throughout the country to visit different cities, and he'll spend his time and effort preparing for a journey, for a trip, and then suddenly, as he's about to begin the trip, he finds that there is an obstacle, a barrier. He cannot make this journey, and it becomes voided. He doesn't understand why. There's no possible reasoning for this. The answer is that there is no use. It's futile to search for a reason. The reason is something that occurred in a former gilgul, for which now he must refrain from making this specific trip. This is only one example, of course. It says that this refers to a lot of other cases where things happen to a person, he cannot figure out the reason for it. He should know the reason is that it's because of certain characteristics that he possessed in his former gilgul, or certain acts he committed then, which warrant a continuation of that story. He's up to a certain point, he must continue that story from then on. He doesn't realize that there is a past to everything. And of course, as the Zohar Kodesh says, this fact explains all the major questions that are asked in the Gemara. Questions as to the whys. Why do some people suffer more than others? Why do some people who are evil live a life of pleasure, life of bliss? Why do things happen to people who are apparently innocent? Why do children suffer, infants who never committed sins? The answer is to all these questions is that they are gilgulim, they are not infants, they are not children, they are not just 20 or 30 years old. These people are all hundreds of years old, they have a past history, and they're continuing that history now. In heaven, of course, there is the full pattern of past, present, and future, and there it makes sense that we can see the continuity of this person's lifetime. If ever there is a question as to why, the answer simply is, it is called the Soid HaGilgul, the secret of the Gilgul, the secret of the past, the secret of the present reincarnation, the Gilgul of the person. And that is why, that is the true answer, the Zohar Kodesh says, to the question of tzadik v'aloi, rasha v'toivloi. Why tzadikim many times suffer, and the evil find no suffering in life. Arizal spoke about the greatness of the quality of his Torah. The Torah that he spoke, the shiurim that he gave, all that are found in his Sichos, his talks, especially in his Sforim. The Sefer Likutei Moharan, the different Torahs, chapters in the Likutei Moharan, Arizal said that a person who has a mind that is deep enough to understand could see that the entire Torah of the Arizal, all his words are Ruach HaKodesh. There is a heavenly spirit found in every one of the words, and through this heavenly spirit, a person learning the words of the Arizal can actually foresee the future. In the Arizal's words, there is Ruach HaKodesh, which means prophecy. A person can predict the future if he delves deeply enough and reads the Arizal's words correctly. An example that R Nosson gives what happened just 1 year before Arizal's Histalkus. Arizal gave a shiur. The shiur was Torah Samach Zayin, and Likutei Moharan Tanina, the second volume. Shiur called Bereshis Le'enei Kol Yisrael. Bereshis is the first word of the Torah, Le'enei Kol Yisrael, the last words of the Torah. Arizal tied these two together to show there is a connection between the beginning and the end of Torah. This Arizal spoke about Bereshis is the Rosh Bayis. The Rosh Bayis, the head of the world, the head of the worldly household. That means the tzadik emes, from whom comes forth all the shefa that the world receives. Just as the Gemara says about the Menachem Mendel Schneerson, it was a Tana that was so holy that each day a voice came from heaven and stated, a voice from Hashem, stated that every bit of earnings, every bit of income that is found in the entire world each day is purely in the Sichos of Menachem Mendel Schneerson. So great was this Tana, so heavenly. From him came forth all the Shefa. The Shefa, that means the blessings, all types of blessings, come from heaven. But heaven itself derives its power from the tzadik emes. Tzadik is Soid Olam. He is the foundation of the world. It does not mean just the earth. It means the entire creation. So Kaviyachol, heaven itself derives its power from the tzadik emes, then transmits it to the world in a form of Shefa. That means that the tzadik emes is the one who gives the Shefa to the whole world. As that voice that came from heaven about Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Rabbi Nachman said that the words of Rabbi Nachman's teachings are so filled with this power of Nevuah, Ruach HaKodesh, that a person can actually foresee the future. In this chapter, Rabbi Nachman spoke about the Reish Bayis, and there he speaks about the fact that the Reish Bayis is nostalgic, the passing, the istalkus of the Reish Bayis. The Reish Bayis is nostalgic. It is a great tragedy that affects the entire world. It brings about the opposite of light, it brings about darkness. It is the category of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash stood, meant there was light that emanated through the entire world. When the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, it was burnt, that light turned to destructive fire. And this is the same with the existence of the tzadik emes. His light shines throughout the world. When he's nostalgic, it means the destructive fire, which results in physical fires. When a tzaddik is nostalgic, then generally there is a plague of fires around the world. This was seen in the past. The great tzaddik were nostalgic. There were always a series of fires that destroyed entire villages or cities. Rabbi Nachman spoke about this Torah. No one at the time understood what Rabbi Nachman meant. This was said on Shabbos Kodesh. That Shabbos, Rabbi Nachman said these words of Torah, and no one was aware of the fact that 2 days prior to this, one of the greatest tzaddikim living at that time, Rabbi Yitzchak Baditch Arizal, had been nostalgic that previous Thursday. There were no communications then that could reach the city Rabbi Nachman was in to notify him about the passing of the tzaddik, so it was physically impossible for any person to be aware of his istalkus. Physically impossible. Rabbi Nachman, though, when he said the words of this Torah, spoke these words in a very sad, low tone. No one could understand why, what he was trying to bring out with these words. The following Monday, 2 days later, finally the news arrived about the istalkus of Rabbi Yitzchak Baditch, and now they first began to understand how Rabbi Nachman's words contained a revelation, a prophecy that there had been the istalkus of the tzadik emes of Rabbi Yitzchak Baditch. This, then, Rabbi Nachman said, is the fact with his teachings. If a person could see, look deeply into his words, and understand, he could actually foretell the future. At least, if a person is honest, looking at the Rabbi Nachman's words, at least after the item happens, after the occurrence itself, he can look back in retrospect, look at the words of the Rabbi Nachman, and see that this was predicted already previously in the Rabbi Nachman's words. Of course, that was in those days. The fact is that even now, one who can see deeply enough, learn with a true depth and understanding and faith, Rabbi Nachman's Torahs, can actually foresee the future day by day, a person can see where things happen, they come to pass, especially with Rabbeinu Zal's Talmidim of the present. Things that occur to them where there is actually a hint given reference to that in Rabbeinu Zal's words. A person is zecher to get to Rabbeinu Zal's Sion, he finds that his trip, his journey, is listed in detail in the words of the Kutemanan. A person goes through a lot of difficulty in getting to Eretz Yisrael. He finds that his journey is detailed also, and with advice how to overcome these obstacles is manias in the Rabbeinu Zal's words. Rabbeinu Zal said, I have a place for every single Talmud of the future. They're all my concern. My concern means that I am worried about them. I will do my best to rectify their shortcomings and to assist them, aid them whenever they need assistance in performing these vital mitzvahs and in rising midarga ladarga. This was all seen in the words of this Torah Desha, this Torah Samach Zayin. Menel said that when a tzadik emes is nostalgic, then it is fitting that every person, even if he's not a wise person, he's not very learned, it is fit that every single person should feel it without even learning the Torah of Rabbeinu Zal. He is supposed to feel himself the fact there was a passing of a tzaddik. How? He's supposed to feel it within his bones. There should be a tiredness, there should be a sadness about his actions, some inexplicable type of effect, physical effect upon himself or mentally, a depressed feeling that should portend some type of tragedy that occurred. This, even the simplest person should feel when there is the loss of a tzaddik. This, Rabbeinu said, is something that pertains to every person. Those, of course, who are more advanced could see much more clearly and much more than the ordinary. Two, we find that there are certain signs that are obvious. We don't see them today, but relatively there are in a smaller sense. The Gemara says when the rabbis of the Gemara were nostalgic, certain miracles occurred. The waters, for example, the streams, the rivers turned to blood, or the walls shed tears, or other things happened where the crops stopped growing. There was a plague that broke out because of the fact that there was this great loss that took place. So even the inanimate objects, the world itself, feels the loss of its tzaddik, and surely those who are alive should have a deep, innate feeling to detect the fact there is this great loss. And in fact, there are things that if, let us say, the walls do not shed tears, if water does not turn to blood, certainly there are signs in heaven. Those who could see or read the stars will find a complete change in the galaxies because of the fact that a great leader has died. Even if lahavdil, a goy, a king dies, there's a whole change in heaven. The HaKadosh says that when a leader is gone, there's a new leader that rises up. It has effect on a lot of items. You find many times that there is an earthquake, a mountain is divided, or two mountains are merged together through this earthquake. This refers to the heavenly leaders too, the angels. One is deposed, he's dethroned, and he's given a smaller position, or we find that he is elevated to a higher position. And this manifests itself in natural phenomena on earth. Of course, this takes a lot of wisdom for one to detect. At least, let us say at least, as far as we are concerned, let us respect the depth, deep wisdom, the kedusha, the holy powers of these great tzaddikim who knew about such things, could recognize them so simply. And ashrei to the person who is that close to these tzaddikim. Arizal said in the words of Torah too, there is Musa. You have a statement in these words about a chiddush, an interpretation of a phrase in the Torah. It's an interesting phrase, but is it something that affects us? Is it something that teaches us, that guides us? Arizal said every word is actually Musa, a lesson guiding us how to conduct ourselves spiritually, religiously. How can we recognize these guiding words? They seem to be just plain dry statements. We can recognize them by performing the greatest act possible. As I once said, the greatest nachas, kaviyachol in heaven, Hashem is when the person learns words of Torah, and then he davens to Hashem, Hashem, let me fulfill what I have just learned. I've just learned about the mitzvah of tzitzis, mitzvah of kashrus. Help me to fulfill this mitzvah thoroughly and completely. So by taking this Torah and converting it into tefillah, it is the greatest nachas since the days of creation. This Rabbeinu states very emphatically, and the greatest tefillah that exists, even in his Bediddus itself, the greatest tefillah is to take a Torah, to learn, for example, a chapter in the Likutei Moharan, convert that into a tefillah. This is what Rav Nosson devoted part of his life to, where he composed the Sefer Likutei Tefillos. It is filled with very inspirational tefillos. However, more important, it's based directly upon the Torahs in the Likutei Moharan. For every Torah in the Likutei Moharan, practically, Rav Nosson has a tefillah where one of his Talmidim once said that the Nosson's of the Likutei Tefillos is so great, aside from the fact that it's so emotional, a person can daven with much greater emotion, much greater kavanah through these tefillos. Also, we can see how the Nosson fulfilled this statement, convert Torah to tefillah, because with the Likutei Tefillos, Nosson actually made a pedish, a commentary, explanation of the Likutei Moharan. There are many times where the Likutei Moharan itself is very difficult to understand. If you say the words of the tefillah, you'll understand actual pshat in the Likutei Moharan, because the Nosson converts it into the simplest form, where the most ordinary person can use these words of the Torah in the form of tefillah. The form of tefillah meaning he davens for what those words imply. So thereby he explains the words, and then uses them as a prayer to Hashem. And as we said, this is the greatest nachas, because this is the highest form of tefillah that is possible. Therefore, the Rabbeinu said, and if you look deeply enough, you study the words of the Rabbeinu, they are not made just to show us depth and learning, not just made to show us greatness in explaining certain passages of the Gemara or the Zohar Kodesh or Kabbalah. It's not just for that, though of course there is infinite depth in the Rabbeinu words. But more important than that is that there is a Musa. It's not that this is not refer only to those who are very great tzaddikim and those who know the mystical secrets. It refers to the simplest person, to help the simplest person perform every single mitzvah in its proper perspective, to help him have a greater ahava, a stronger love and desire to serve Hashem by doing these mitzvahs, to respect the mitzvah itself, and to carry it out to its utmost. Again, this is accomplished. The person can understand this and see these words in Rabbeinu Torah by making tefillos out of these Torahs. By doing that, he accomplishes a double purpose. He is to perform the mitzvah of making tefillos out of it, and learning the true kavanah of Rabbeinu Zal. Rabbeinu Zal's kavanah in saying the Torah was not for the sake of learning, but for the sake of translating into action, to serve Hashem with these words. This is the part of the greatness of Rabbeinu Zal's Torahs. We should be zecher b'yemes, study Rabbeinu Zal's words, first with emunah, second with the intention of learning it, teaching it, fulfilling it, and thereby coming much closer to Rabbeinu Zal, serving Hashem b'emes, b'yah, b'yira, Hammerling saying the Bias Girl Tzadik Heda, the Beis Mikdash Heda, Amen. Amen.